the social process undermining taking for granted categories, the divergence between representations and practices, and the blueprint to grasp the complex repertory of actions, poetics, and power relations underpinning the religious and ritual scene that Sri Lankan Catholics live and perform in the city of Messina. Because today we refer to Sri Lankans, and specifically to Sri Lankan Catholics, who form a very important community in the migration landscape in Sicily, and particularly in the city of Messina. Even if, as you probably know, Sri Lanka is a multi-religious nation, Buddhism is the main religion officially recognized and even claimed by the Sri Lankan state. But in Sicily, and particularly in Messina, they are mostly Catholic, and they are Sinhala, not Tennis. So in Messina, they must relate to the local Catholic Church. I'm speaking always about Sri Lankan Catholics. So they must relate to the local church, to local church institutions, first of all, to make use of the premises of the church that they were granted about 10 years ago by the Migrants Foundation, that is a pastoral unit within the Italian Episcopal Conference addressed to the pastoral care of migrants. So Sri Lankan Catholics in Messina are inserted into a web of relations made of the links between Sri Lankan Catholics, the Catholic Diocese of Messina, the pastoral units in charge of the spiritual needs of migrants and their soft disciplining toward correct patterns of religiosity, and the wider universal church, Catholic Church, with its constituent relation to particular churches that are the churches made of nationals or ethnic groups and communities. So in Messina, since 10 years, the Baroque Church of Saint Elia has been made available to Sri Lankans by the local Migrants office. In the church, many ritual events are held, like masses on Saturdays, on Sundays, and during the week, in parallel to Sri Lankan saints' days. So following the Sri Lankan ritual time spans. So there's a continual symbolic and material relationship to the home country, especially by first-generation migrants. So there is a very dense and rich devotional sphere on which I cannot focus on today due to time reasons. As a religious institution working in the diaspora, there are some images from Saint Elia. This parish, the Sri Lankan parish of Saint Elia, represents the ordering principle of a new cartography, producing a religious homemaking of the migration space. Here you can see the division in zones of the city of Messina, in which the Sri Lankan parish is articulated. This is a map of the city of Messina that Sri Lankan people divided into the several zones of the parish of the Sri Lankan parish. So, due to the increasing relevance of the Sri Lankan Catholic community in Messina, the Catholic Diocese of Messina, also through its associative entities in charge of the pastoral care of migrants, about 10 years ago, started to frame this group more systematically within the wider Catholic path. So, in a global and always more multicultural church, the role of the so-called ethnic Catholic community, as they are called by the Catholic Church, is particularly relevant in the translocal architecture of the Catholic Church. So, this relation, however, is more troubled than one might think, and local initiatives and the Sri Lankan protagonism make the belonging to a shared Catholic community negotiated and questioned every day. So we know that the relation between unity and diversity in Christian religion has always been relevant in the history of Christianity, just think of the concept of enculturation. However, along the post-colonial trajectory of Catholicism, this relation today is shaped by race and class ideologies working in the multicultural church. And as for another field of migrant working, the essentiality of foreign workforce, like priests and nuns in the religious field, coexist with the differential evaluation that clergy and society in full address to migrant foreign priests and to religious practices judged as irreducibly other, For example, the Sri Lankan ethnic chaplain is the capellan, is charged of the pastoral and spiritual needs of a particular religious and national community, the Sri Lankan community, whose religiosity is often object of a rationalized construction, that is the sincere, authentic, fervent, but heterodox and disordered devotion of South Asian Christians. This is a trope widespread in Europe, as many ethnographies reveal. So even if around 10 years ago, so the Church of Messina granted the use of Saint Elia for Sri Lankan Catholics, we shouldn't think of an hegemonic framing from above of this religious community, because the encounter between the church expectations and the exigencies of distinctivity developed within the Sri Lankan community is politically dense. And the misunderstandings, the demand of organizational autonomy, the discrepancies in theological matters, the differential evaluation of patterns of religiosity are not mere accidents along the integration itinerary of Sri Lankan Catholics toward the Christian extended family. It's rather a matter of the aporias, which are intrinsic within church universally, that the church still express and evolves against the background of an epochal shifting from of the Christian gravity from the West. So now I just go through a few sources of conflict that I had the opportunity to observe during my ethnography. Some of them concern the ritual setting within the parish of Saint Elia, like the location of statues, of icons that, according to Migrantes' office, contrast with the liturgical meanings of the altar. This is the picture of the Madonna del Perpetuo Soccorso, the Perpetuo Soccorso, the perpetual help, that is celebrated as in Sri Lanka every Wednesday in the evening. And the location at the center of the altar space create contrast with the liturgical meanings of the sacrifice of Christ. That is the main meaning, liturgical meaning of the altar. Or I think also to the intervention on the wall of the church in the occasion of the parish feast. During the feast, a complex system of strings and ropes is set up for the hoisting of the flagpole. This system is called Coliga, containing the flag of Saint Elia. Saint Elia, I say also that is not recognized in Sri Lanka. People in Sri Lanka do not know Saint Elia. After they come in Italy, they know Saint Elia. In this case, is the saint patron of the parish. To do this, Sri Lankans negotiate every year the possibility to drill the wall, something that contrasts with the preservation of the historical and architectural asset represented by this ancient Baroque rectory. And 1 year they effectively pierced the wall without asking permission to the director of the artist. I go directly now to another context of this city. I would like to speak also about the problematic reception of saints by Sri Lankans, saints proposed, introduced to Sri Lankans by the Catholic institutions and associations, nuns, but maybe later if there will be time. And I just come to another part of this, of my relation, second part. We have to know that Sri Lankans are commonly perceived and classified in the city of Messina as an ordered and disciplinary presence in the city. Even if they represent the larger foreign community, their social visibility is reduced given their work, given their economic placement in the city of Messina, because they work inside houses as care or domestic workers. So their collective presence in the public space is limited to a few occasions, and even ritual events. This is in the occasion of the feast of Saint Elia. Also in ritual occasions, processions are not extended beyond the surrounding spaces of the parish. So there are not Sri Lankan public associations that mediate within them and the local public sphere. Social relations are mostly of a co-ethnic kind. It's unusual in Messina to see Sri Lankans, even the younger, walking or speaking to Italian people. So there is a sort of encapsulation of social relations in the everyday life in the city, in Messina. for what concerns the Sri Lankans. So this silent, ordered presence in the city is certainly produced also by the Catholic Church of Messina, because the church works every day to insert these people inside Italian families in need of domestic and care workers. So the church guarantees for a particular subjectivation of the Sri Lankan presence. Sri Lankans are others, are migrants, are foreigners, but they are Catholics. So in the scale of local racialized perception of foreign workforce, Sri Lankans are put on a better position if compared to the one of Bangladeshi, Pakistanis, because they are Asians, Sri Lankans, but they are Christians. So this otherness is mitigated through the work of the Church of Messina. Now, I would like to take into account this space of the city of Messina. This is Piazza del Popolo, square of the People's Square, that is much peculiar space in the city of Messina, because this square is located just outside the inner center of the city, and it is attended mainly by migrants, North Africans, Sri Lankans, Bangladeshi, Eastern Europe migrants, also by Italian people who are mostly part of anarchist or alternative political collectives. And it is also known in Messina as the Square of the Anarchists. All around the square, there are several shops, restaurants, markets, mainly Sri Lankans, but not only. There are also patronati that are offices for bureaucratic, documental needs, especially for migrants. So passing through the square, during the day, especially after the sunset, you can see that every group, every national group occupies a distinct portion of the space. So Sri Lankans are usually placed in the northern part of the square. They come to Piazza del Popolo usually at the end of the morning and after the sunset. They sit on the benches, they eat, they drink, and speak together. They are linked also to the personnel working in these shops and markets all around the square. So this is a square where leftist parties and associations usually organize demonstrations, meetings, but it is also a place perceived in Messina as highly dangerous. So I don't know why in this slide the two pictures were not connected in my mind, but it was a mistake. However, so it's a place perceived as highly dangerous. Police is very often called by the few Italian traders owning their shops, who denounce that after the sunset, drunk people make the place unlivable. Some of them complained that they are forced to close their shops, their markets. There are often fights between drunk people, and the small bookcase for free usage that was the People's Library, installed by a book circle some years ago, is now crumbling. So Piazza del Popolo has become, over the years, a symbol of urban degradation without a serious reasoning about the causes of social disease, of course. So the decor invoked by traders and by many citizen associations who address their complaints to local media coincide with the removal of people attending the square. And in many cases, also Sri Lankans, Italian people have been object of the intervention of the police, from paper checking to other forms of social control. In some cases, when people were already known by local services, they were object of forced treatment. So Piazza del Popolo can be considered as a disordered space where subjunctive social relations, drawing differently on ethnic and cultural belonging, take place in non-normative ways, in unusual modalities that in other places of the city, especially in the downtown, would never occur. This is the only square in the city, Messina, where Italian and migrants foreign people share the same square, the same space, even if relations between them are limited, are not so developed, especially for the linguistic gaps existing between these social groups, and relations are often limited to the purchase of alcohol by Italians in Sri Lankan markets and shops. They are all aware of the particular feature of this square. As one of my Sri Lankan interlocutors once told me, this is the square of everyone. So this is not enough, of course, to speak of multiculturalism, which is also a very problematic concept. But what is important to consider, I think, is that a preliminary sign of interethnic relations emerges in Messina outside of the parish of St. Elia, for example. And if we remember that for Victor Turner, the liminoid always contains a transformative potential, this is the case for a square that opens to new patterns of social relations, starting with the physical coexistence in the urban space. So it's interesting to consider that Sri Lankan people in Piazza del Popolo hold a different social status if compared to the invisible and disciplined one of the Sri Lankans working in the houses and whose presence is mediated by and framed within the local Catholic Church in Messina. Local newspapers sometimes report the news of petty crimes happening within the Sri Lankan community, and in the majority of cases, this is about the settling scores, lending money, usury. Okay, go as fast as I can. So outside the parish of St. Elia, Sri Lankans are usually depicted as a social problem, as migration is usually considered in public debate. When I began to develop an interest about this square, I asked my interlocutors in St. Elia, with whom I spent almost 1 year of ethnography, if they knew someone of the Sri Lankans attending this square, because I would have liked to understand social dynamics occurring in this place. And the person I was speaking to immediately told me firmly, don't do that, forget about those filthy people, so dirty people. In the evening, they become dead, avoid them. I was not entirely surprised about this reaction, but I was not supposed to find any kind of link between them. So I come just to the conclusion part. Every Christmas, the Sri Lankan group attending the square sets up a nativity scene, presepio in Spain, Castellano, presepio, okay. And they do that without any linkage to the parish of St. Elia. As you can see, this crib is not very small, and a few years ago, before the beginning of my research, this crib has been taken into consideration also for local exhibitions of crib art. Every day they look after the scene, they water plants, and so on. So in this occasion, they also refer to themselves as the Sri Lankan community of Messina, and they show also they employ the Italian flag as a sign of exchange and hospitality. However, they do not form an association, so this self-presentation is ideal, just related to this Christmas occasion. To set and install the crib, they do not connect to the Sri Lankan parish. They ask help for permissions and the connection to electricity to the parish priest of another church, an Italian church, an Italian shrine, not a Sri Lankan one, that is very close to the square. The priest helped them for bureaucratic matters, for permissions, he signs the request addressed to the municipality for land occupation, and at the Christmas Eve, so the day before Christmas, in the late afternoon, this Italian priest gives his blessing to the crib, which is requested by Sri Lankan people. The parish priest told me once that he was impressed by the fact that all the people gathered in the square and waiting for the blessing were just men under 50 years old, without women, without children. So it's quite the opposite of the composition of the Sri Lankan ethnic chaplains, the parish of St. Elia, where family is the base unity to which people usually refer when speaking about the community, when organizing feasts, rituals. So in that occasion, I think there is a ritual claiming for autonomy that is developed outside the dimension of the ethnic chaplains, the cappella, and without asking permission to the Sri Lankan chaplain. So in this part of the city, the sacred, or better, religiosity, is affirmed in the public space thanks to young liminal people, young and less young men alone, without family and being not married, without something that is perceived not socially proper, not ethically desirable by Sri Lankan Catholics. So by means of the installation of this crib, by its blessing by an Italian priest, the ordinary carrying of the crib for 2 weeks until the end of Christmas holidays, These people affirm their presence in the urban landscape by affirming an ethical pattern that is radically different from the one they usually embody in the square. So this affirmation, just 30 seconds, passes through a divergence, this time directed to the same national community of Saint Elaine, the parish. Even if they share the same ethnic national coordinates, the group around the Piazza del Popolo does not want to be identified with the Pacific ordered community of Sri Lankans of the parish of Saint Elaine. So Piazza del Popolo is home for those Sri Lankans out of place in the hegemonic, I would say, religious infrastructure that defined by Sri Lankans in Saint Elaine. Here, religiosity, the exhibition of religiosity condensed in the crib, may be read as the claim for a common religiosity addressed to other Catholics, that are the Italians, who otherwise are alarmed by the unsafe conditions of the urban space all around the square. And maybe this is the only possibility to ask for social recognition, given the hard and unequal conditions that place many Sri Lankans, as many other migrant and foreign groups, on the marginal side of the host society. So, to conclude, in analogous but different ways, also the Catholic community of Sant'Elaria asked for recognition, but it moves within the strict institutional and political horizon defined by the Church of Messina and its ecclesial units, Church of Pastoral Care of Migrants and Foreign Catholics. Even in this case, to be identified as equals in the same religious family, a universal and at the same time global family, is not something immediate, not something reciprocal, because the God of miracles, as defined once by the director of the Migrantes office, criticizing the miraculous religiosity of Sri Lankans, this God is always dark-skinned. Thank you. Muchas gracias for your attention.